Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start with a new chapter: liberalization, privatization, and globalization. And my topic would be the balance of payment crisis. First, the introduction. India followed a mixed economic model that combined the best practices of both socialist economy and the market economy. And there are arguments and counter arguments on the working of these policies. The first argument is that these policies, which were aimed at regulating the economy, instead ended up hampering the growth, while the counter arguments are that these policies they have kick-started Indian economy from near stagnation to a trajectory of growth, and since then India has also been able to diversify its industrial portfolio. Then let's take a background look at balance of payment crisis. So in 1991, India it met with the balance of payment crisis, which was related to its external debt. So external debt is the amount of money that was owned by India to other foreign institutions, especially the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So India was not able to make repayments on the borrowing it made from these institutions, and foreign exchange reserve, the forex, which are generally maintained to import petrol and other consumables, they were not sufficient even for a fortnight. And this crisis, it was also compounded by rising prices on essential goods. So let's take a background look at what these terms mean. External debt. So debt is money that somebody owe to others, and here that other belongs to foreign countries. That's why it is called external. If the same money is owned from resident of India, then this debt would have been called domestic debt. So external debt was its background would be when India got independence and the first 5-year plan that was started in 1952. Condition of India was that 75% of population it was engaged in agriculture and allied activity. Then the growth of agriculture it was near stagnation, means the growth it has stopped, no growth at all, or even if there was some growth, it was minimal. So it meant 75% of population was engaged in unremunerative unremunerative economic activity, which means returns are not sufficient. Returns are not sufficient, not adequate enough, or in simple language, loss. So 75% of population it was reeling under loss. It was employed in an economic activity that was constantly generating loss, but still these many people, three-fourths of population was engaged in it because there were no other avenue to generate income. Industrial sector it could not be developed, and the British they could not allow its development, and other sources. The only one left is the service sector, which during the British time could not even start in its infancy. So all in all, this was the economic condition of India at the time of independence. So when we got independence, the nationalist leader they tried to kickstart the economy by the avenue of 5-year plan, and making expenditure on first infrastructure sector, the second social sector, and third industrial sector. And by investing in these sectors, they believe that these projects, even if they are of long gestation means the projects or the policies they which take time to generate revenue. Revenue means income. These are the projects that needed and would have taken long time to generate revenue. So infrastructure projects such as road, railway, hospitals, schools, social policies on poverty eradication, employment generation, and then industrial sector was to build industries. So all these projects they needed money, and for any government, the financial are similar to those undertaken by any individual or any corporation. So financial they are accounted for in terms of income and expenditure, and government it resort to income in two ways. The first one is its taxation, other one is borrowing. And taxation it can take two forms. First one is direct and the other one is indirect. And direct taxation it can take the form of personal income and corporate income, whereas the indirect taxes they can be levied on goods and services. So all in all, this is one avenue of income generation or revenue generation for any government. And the other one it can be borrowing, and government can borrow from domestic sources or the external sources. Now let's have a look at the time we are talking about. It's 1950s to 1980s, the 4 decades of independence. So the situation here was that to generate revenue through taxation, the people who are imposed or people who are levied such taxation, they need to have purchasing capacity, or at least in simple terms, they are to pay, rich enough to pay taxes. And for anyone to pay taxes, he or she needs to be engaged in some economic activity, some remunerative economic activity. Remunerative means something that is generating income. So here I'll exchange it with they need to be engaged in income generating economic activity. But I am talking about the first 4 decades of independence when people, most of the people, they were employed in agriculture and agriculture was loss making. So income generating activities were not there. And then the other thing, the industrial sector, most of it was under the control of government by the method of permits or licenses, and the private industrial sector it was reserved in only a few pockets which the government could not undertake. And we have read about this in the previous chapter at how private industrial sector it was protected by government, and most of the industrial activity they were undertaken by government in the form of permits and public sector enterprises. So the public sector enterprises they were also making losses, and the private sector, it was still in infancy, semi-developed. So if we look at the whole situation, the purchasing capacity of people were not there. People were not engaged in, or such income generating activities were not there. That made, and that can be guessed from it, that people were not rich enough to pay taxes. People were not able to pay taxes. So both the personal income and corporate income, it can be cancelled out for the earliest 4 decades. Then income from goods and services, and here also the same caveat comes into picture, that people need to be rich enough to pay taxes. If people do not have any economic activity that is generating constant revenue or good profits, they are not likely to buy goods and services. How can this be possible? If people are poor, how will they buy any goods and services? And if goods and services are not bought by people on mass scale, because that's how government is going to generate revenue from goods and services, if they are bought by most of the people, or bought on mass scale. So that's how it is going to levy taxes. But if people are not buying, or if people are not rich enough to buy those things, so the other avenue of taxation, it can also be cancelled out. Then the other avenue for income, it was borrowing. The first one is domestic, and these are, the domestic situation has already been mentioned here, which was very poor to look at. The income generation was not there. So the domestic sources, the domestic borrowing could not be resorted to. The only avenue, the only source available to India at the time was the external sources, which were World Bank and IMF. So this was the financial condition of India during the first 4 decades of independence. Then, when we look at the expenditure side, government, it needed to spend money on, first, implementing policies, and second, to meet the imports. And the imports take the form of two. First, the import of energy resources, especially the fossil fuels, because India still do not have the reserve or the resources of extracting fossil fuels. And then the other import was goods, manufactured goods, which could be imported from other countries, other nations, which can be clubbed into consumables. So India needed money for these two reasons. First, to implement all the policies which are infrastructure sector, social sector, and industrial sector. And all those sector, all the policies or the areas where government initially invested money, it they could not generate immediate revenue. They were projects of long gestation. So immediate revenues could not be available, could not be made available by investing in those resources. And at the same time, India needed money to import both energy resources and consumables. So that's why India, it borrowed from other sources, which is known as external borrowing. And there is one more thing that need to be made clear, which is the transactions. They also take the form of the territory they are in. The transactions are also territorial. So if They are domestic transaction. They are transacted in domestic currency and regulated by an authority, RBI. But the transactions are global, then they are transacted in a global currency, which during that time was United States dollar, and in present time it is SDR, which is a group of five currencies. And all global transactions, they are monitored by many agencies, which include sovereign nations plus global financial institutions. So all in all, my idea was here that global transactions, they do not take place in domestic currencies. Global transactions, they need to be accepted in foreign currencies, and any country, it need to maintain sufficient reserves of foreign currencies so that it can uh, dip its hand, it can use those resources in the time of need, in which are especially the imports and second repayments. So that's why forex reserve, they needed to maintain at sufficient quantity. So at present, the foreign exchange, the forex reserve of India may be in the tune of 700, 600 or 700 billion US dollar. But at the time, during the 1991, the foreign exchange, the forex reserve, they declined to so low level that they were able to maintain imports only for 15 days or a fortnight. So the depletion of foreign exchange reserve or forex reserve, it it happened because of all these reasons, which have been explained in details. That the one reason is not enough, and one reason could not be given. It is the whole background that led to the balance of payment crisis in 1991. Now let's go back to the NCERTs. Let's talk about the background. So this origin of financial crisis, it can be traced to the inefficient management of Indian economy in the 1980s. So, and we also know that to implement various policies, government generate funds and revenue using various sources such as taxation and running of public sector enterprises. But when the expenditure, it is more than income, it is known as deficit. And the opposite of which is when income is more than expenditure, it is known as surplus. So during the first 5 decades of independence, India was constantly under deficit, and that deficit, it was financed by borrowing from financial institutions. And India was also in such a condition that it had to overshoot its revenue to meet problems like unemployment, poverty eradication. So the meaning of this passage is that it was not just the inefficient management, it was also the necessity of time, because India, a young country and a country which was reeling under poverty and unemployment, it needed to spend money on various economic policies, various development policies. Then, where government was spending its resources. So, government was spending large share of its income, which were of long gestation, which do not provide immediate returns, such as social sector and defense. And the income from public sector enterprises was not also very high. So we borrowed from foreign countries which are kept in foreign exchange, and this forex reserve, it was consumed, it was used spent on meeting consumption needs. Then by late 1980s, the government expenditure it began to exceed its revenue, and imports they also grew at very high rate. It was because by 1980s, some of the people or some of the sectors they started industrializing, they started modernizing, and it was the gestation phase in which uh, to grow their particular industry, to grow their particular avenue of money generation, it needed resources, it needed imports. Let's take example of anybody um, who started a simple initiative such as a steel making industry, and now he is willing to take this industry to generate sufficient income, and for which he needs tools, the intermediate tools, the raw materials, the expertise, the manpower, the technology, the machineries, and all of these manufactured goods they were not available in India. They were not available in India at that time. So this entrepreneur he needed to buy them from other countries, and because of that he needed to import them. And the similar initiative by many such entrepreneurs and many such traders, the import rate at that time of many consumables, which could have been tools, raw materials, technology, machinery, or simple consumables. Even the import of petrol it reached a record high, because when industrialize proceed on, it will need initial greasing. So here the initial greasing is in the form of construction of infrastructure which was undertaken by government, but then the individual initiative they needed all these resources which could only be imported. So let's say this steel manufacturer he started this company and all the tools they have been imported, and as I have told you, imports they are dealt by separate account known as forex. So he could have made the payments in domestic currency, but at the international level, domestic currency it is not acceptable. So international transaction could only be transacted, could only be accounted for in terms of foreign currencies. So this initiative, the starting steel manufacturing industry, steel manufacturing factory, this could have taken time, but at the instance when he was making all the investment, this investment it could have eaten away the precious foreign exchange reserve. And in the same way, those who were employed in this particular factory, from simple uh, peon to high class, high management, all of them they also needed to resort to or undertake initial investment in form of purchase of petrol, purchase of vehicles, purchase of other essential commodities. So all in all, when any country is industrialized, initial investment are likely to take place. And such initial investment, when the country is not generating sufficient revenue, they will eat away foreign exchange reserve at a high rate. And it also happened that if during the initial phase of industrialization, if any country itself is not industrialized, and if the domestic sources of domestic sources which could provide the initial commodities. If they are not there, then the country it has to import all these commodities even if they are basic. So all in all, foreign exchange reserve can be eaten away or can be depleted by all such resources. And because of all these foreign exchange reserve, they declined to a level that was not adequate to finance import for more than 2 weeks for a fortnight. And when foreign exchange forex reserve were not there, India could not pay the interest that need to be paid to other international lenders. So in that situation, India approached World Bank and International Monetary Fund and received 7 billion as a loan. And when in the international arena, when you are in dire necessity, in a situation of dire necessity, and you seek the intervention of other powers, whether they are sovereign powers or financial powers, they are likely to intervene in terms of conditionalities. It is an open secret. Nobody is giving you a loan for free. Even with the high interest rate, they are going to exploit the situation for their own benefit. And that's how, for availing the loan, the international agencies they expected India to liberalize and open up the economy by removing restriction on private sector. So these were the conditionalities that were imposed by World Bank and IMF in return for the loan. And India accepted these conditionalities and announced a new economic policy. This new economic policy, which was in short uh, aimed at opening up Indian market to other countries, because we have read this in previous chapter that during the first 4 or 5 decades of independence, the socialism hue was there, the socialism aura was there, and this was also the time when the the government rule was there, when government owned all the resources, government owned all the public sector enterprises, private and domestic production. It was protected by in terms of tariff and quota. So in short, we can say that before the introduction of new economic reforms, India was a closed economy. Reasons for this closed economy or reason for protecting the domestic economy has already been elaborated in the previous chapter, and they were necessary for that time. But all in all, these restrictions and these protective measures, they instead of building India into a new and industrialized country, it hampered its progress. And finally, the closed economy, it was brought to open and competitive environment by this balance of payment crisis. So this NEP, New Economic Policy, it consisted of wide-ranging economic reforms. First one was to create a more competitive environment and removing the barriers to entry and growth of firms, which in short can be known as privatization. So here the domestic protection, which was the key policy of earlier decades, it was removed, and privatization it was given a good thrust. And this set of policies, it can be classified into two groups. The first one is stabilization measures and the second one is structural reforms. So stabilization measures, they are short-term measures which intended to correct the weaknesses in the balance of payment and inflation. So by stabilization, the economy was stabilized. Money was the 7 billion loan was given, which provided the required help that India needed, and its foreign exchange reserve it was also refilled. And then, because of high inflation, uh, that led to the uh, that led to play a small part in the whole balance of payment crisis. This inflation was also brought under control, and this has been encapsulated here that if any country maintains sufficient forex, this will keep the prices under control. Then let's talk about the structural reforms. They were of long term, which aimed at improving the efficiency of economy and increase its international competitiveness by removing the rigidity in previous sections or previous segments of Indian economy. So the introduced reforms, they could be clubbed under three heads known as liberalization, privatization, and globalization. The first two are policy strategy, and the last one is an outcome of this strategy. Let me give you a small idea about LPG. Liberalization, it means to remove all the rigidities, to remove all the protection that has been given to Indian economy, to domestic producers and domestic um, private persona. Privatization means to hand over government-owned public sector enterprises to private entities. And globalization means to integrate the closed economy, the closed Indian economy into the international economy. So these were the briefs about the three reforms. That's it. Thank you very much.